Welcome back. Welcome again to our series on a biblical basis for befriending foreigners. And yes, I can say that 5 times fast, but I won't bother you now. We're working now on our second lesson in the series entitled, Because You Were Foreigners. And this lesson will feature some Old Testament texts that work at the issue of how to build empathy for those who are foreigners in the midst of the Jewish people or the Israelite people. And these Old Testament texts do that by reminding the listeners of the fact that their people were foreigners in the land of Egypt. That's a theme that comes up a number of times in the Hebrew Bible. Exodus 1-2 tells about how Egyptians came to oppress Hebrews. Abraham and Sarah went to Egypt for relief from famine. So did some of their descendants, Jacob and his children and their families all went to Egypt following the invitation of Joseph, who had been sold there as a slave. As the political changes occurred, their descendants were mistreated in Egypt and made slaves, and they suffered 400 years of slavery, according to Scripture. The Egyptians were afraid that the Hebrew people would become too numerous and rebel. The Hebrew people were forced to do construction of Egyptian supply cities and other projects involving bricks and a mortar. Very hard work designed to keep them busy and not rebel. Also, Pharaoh in Exodus commands that all the baby boys born to Hebrew mothers should be killed. And Moses only escapes that fate through the courage of the women who protected him, Hebrew midwives, his mother, his sister, and Pharaoh's daughter, who rescues him out of the Nile and raises him in Pharaoh's palace. So Moses has a unique situation. He later, as he grows up, goes out and experiences for himself the oppression of his people. And it takes vengeance at one point when a Hebrew slave is being beaten by Egyptians. He kills an Egyptian, and when that's found out about, he has to flee for his life. So he goes to the land of Midian, and there he meets some women at a well. These women are all daughters of a priest named Reuel, or Jethro, sometimes he's called. Moses defends them at the well. They invite him home, to their home, probably their tent, for hospitality. And hospitality causes a blessing. Moses finds a place to stay, and he marries one of these daughters, Zipporah. So Moses agrees to stay with Reuel, and Reuel gives Moses his daughter Zipporah in marriage. She bore a son and named him Gershom, for he said, I have been an alien residing in a foreign land. Now the Hebrew word there for alien is ger. Gershom means alien there. So Moses reflects his experience as a foreigner in the way he names his first child. Now this is, I think, part of the process of Moses' education. He is learning to identify with his people, the Hebrew people. Even though he was raised as an Egyptian prince, he needs to identify with the slaves, what it is like to be an alien, what it is like to be in a foreign land. And he is expressing that experience now as a result of his flight to Midian. In the law of Moses, then, as the Hebrew people are delivered from slavery in Egypt, and I won't rehearse that long story, but they are brought to the land that God promised to Abraham and Sarah, and they are given that land through a process that is complex and somewhat problematic for many, and yet it is God's way of rescuing those slaves, giving them justice, and giving them the opportunity to live out their faith in love for God and one another. The law of Moses is designed to help them live out the values of justice that God exercised when God rescued them from slavery. So they are called to do justice to the alien, the foreigner in their midst, because, why? Well, they're reminded repeatedly, because you were foreigners in the land of Egypt. You know what it was like to be mistreated in that setting, so don't mistreat others. Pay forward the justice that I gave to you, God says. So let's now read about a festival that involves a reinforcement of the people's memory of being foreigners. How do we keep this collective memory fresh? Well, we have a feast every year in which we rehearse the story. And not only do we rehearse that story, but we invite the foreigner to the feast. In Deuteronomy 26, 1-11, it says, "When you have come into the land that the Lord your God has given you as an inheritance to possess, and you possess it and settle in it, you shall take some of the first of all the fruit of the ground, which you harvest from the land that the Lord your God is giving you, and you shall put it in a basket and go to the place that the Lord your God will choose as a dwelling for his name. You shall go to the priest who is in office at that time and say to him, 'Today I declare to the Lord your God that I have come into the land that the Lord swore to our ancestors to give us.' When the priest takes the basket from your hand and sets it down before the altar of the Lord your God, you shall make this response before the Lord your God. 'A wandering Aramean was my ancestor. He went down into Egypt and lived there as an alien, few in number, and there he became a great nation.'" Just a note about the wandering Aramean. What does that mean? A wandering Aramean refers to Assyrian. Aram is what we now call Syria. And who is this wandering Aramean? Most scholars think it is Jacob. Jacob was the one who fled Canaan to escape the anger of his brother Esau. And where does he flee? To Haran, where some of his relatives still live, Laban and his family. So Jacob is called here an Aramean because he was in Aram, which is part of Syria, to be with his uncle Laban's family. That's where Jacob also marries both both Rachel and Leah, and has many children and flocks. So Jacob and his family are wandering Arameans, and they escape famine by going to Egypt. They become a great nation, mighty and populous. When the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us, we cried to the Lord, the God of our ancestors. The Lord heard our voice and saw our affliction, our toil, and our oppression. The Lord brought us out of Egypt with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm, with a terrifying display of power and with signs and wonders. And he brought us into this place and gave us this land, a land flowing with milk and honey. This is a confession of faith. You might call it a creed. It's telling the story of the Hebrew people, how God rescued them from slavery and gave them the good land. And notice how it reinforces the people's collective memory of what it was like to be a slave in Egypt. They tell this story, and not only do they tell it about their ancestors, those people way back when, they tell it in first person with their own pronouns. The Lord brought us out of the land of Egypt when the Egyptians treated us harshly and afflicted us by imposing hard labor on us. People who told that story, attended this festival, shared this confession, were not necessarily descendants of those slaves in Egypt. They didn't have that experience themselves, nor necessarily did all of their ancestors. But they are able to tell the story as a collective experience of their people, reinforcing their collective memory of what it is like to be a foreigner oppressed in another nation. And this is one way of building empathy for the experience of foreigners so that they can treat foreigners well. The confession continues. "So now I bring the first of the fruit of the ground that you, O Lord, have given me. Then you shall set it down before the Lord your God and bow down before the Lord your God. then you, together with the Levites and the aliens who reside among you, shall celebrate with all the bounty that the Lord your God has given you and to your house. This isn't just the recitation of a creed, it is a feast, a Thanksgiving feast, you might say. And it is a way to include the Levites, that is, the religious leaders, who were not given a specific inheritance of land in the Promised Land, so they need to be included another way. And it also, note, includes the aliens who reside among you. They are explicitly to be included in this feast. So that also increases empathy. When you include them at your table, you learn to know them, and you practice this gift of hospitality, gift of justice. You might say you pay forward the gift that God has given you among new foreigners. Now here is a traditional painting of a traditional event in Americans' collective memory. Here is a portrayal of the first Thanksgiving in 1621 at the Massachusetts Bay Colony in Plymouth Rock in Massachusetts. Puritans escaped for religious freedom and hoped to set up a colony where they could worship God as they chose. They suffered immensely. In their first winter, they were down to very limited rations. Many of them died of starvation and sickness, but those that survived were able to plant a crop the next year. They planted it with the help of the Native Americans of that area. The Wampanoag tribe befriended these settlers and helped to show them how to survive, to get food in that area. When they had a crop and were able to celebrate, I imagine that they had scriptures like Deuteronomy 26, 1 to 11 in mind. I don't know that for sure, but they were bringing the first fruits of their harvest, obeying scripture by having a feast, celebrating with thanks the good gifts of God. According to one contemporary account, members of the Wampanoag tribe came not because they were invited to the feast, but because they heard the noise of the hunting that preceded the feast and wanted to check it out. So they came and checked it out. When they found out what was going on, they went and hunted themselves and came back with 5 deer so that there would be enough food. And so with this gift of deer, they were included in the feast. I wish they were more prominent in the painting, but you can see a few of them sitting at the table at the far end. So here is part of the collective memory of our nation with Native Americans and English eating at the same table, thanking God together. Now, a basic question is, who are the foreigners in this painting? The foreigners are the English, right? They're the ones that just arrived. They're the ones that are newcomers that are trying to figure out how to survive in a different milieu. The power of collective memory is what makes it possible for Americans to celebrate Thanksgiving, to include ourselves in this story, whether or not we had anything to do, or our families had anything to do with Plymouth Rock. Lots of Americans came much later, but unless you're a Native American, you have ancestors who came here as foreigners. And so we have, I believe, the opportunity to reinforce a collective memory of coming as foreigners for economic opportunity, for freedom from persecution, for a whole range of reasons. Brethren have a collective memory of coming to Philadelphia, to Germany, from Germany to experience religious freedom here. And so we have the opportunity then to say as well, we were foreigners, and we now need to pay that forward to others who are foreigners in our midst now. So one of the strengths of our country is our ability to welcome foreigners as a nation of foreigners. So as we look now more specifically in the law of Moses at ways in which we are to practice this love of foreigners, or the welcome and justice for foreigners, we see that it isn't just a matter of a general good feeling. There are specific things that the Israelites are to do because they remember what it's like to be a foreigner. So why practice the Sabbath, for example? Both the Sabbath year and the Sabbath day are explained as a way of practicing justice for the foreigner. You shall not oppress a resident alien. Here is that same word ger that Moses used to name his son. Alien or foreigner, it means. You know the heart of an alien, for you are aliens in the land of Egypt. Now here come the specifics. For 6 years you shall sow your land and gather its yield, but the 7th year you shall let it rest and lie fallow, so that the poor of your people may eat, and what they leave the wild animals may eat. You shall do the same with your vineyard and with your olive orchard. 6 days you shall do your work, but on the 7th day you shall rest, so that your ox and your donkey may have relief, and your homeborn slave and the resident alien may be refreshed. When you were in Egypt, they didn't give you any rest. 7 days a week, maybe 24 hours a day, I don't know. You were worked without the justice of a day off. So what should you do now? Correct that by allowing the foreigners who work for you to have a day off. And not only the foreigners, but even your field animals need to have a rest. And the land needs to rest. And in the process, provide food for the poor and for the wild animals. So this is an act of justice that is rooted in the basic motive. You know what it's like to be a foreigner because you are foreigners. Why gleaning? That's another practice that is explained the same way. In Leviticus 19:9-10, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am the Lord your God. This is an intentional act of caring for the poor. It's not just that the poor get to collect what you by mistake have left in your field. You're supposed to leave intentionally some of the crop for the poor to be able to collect, to glean. This painting by Jean-Francois Millet, I guess I'm not too good at pronouncing French, but that's a painting that helps me to empathize with how difficult it would be to be dependent on gleaning for your food supply. It looks like that farmer hasn't left much behind at all, but maybe in the Israelite community they left more for the poor to come and to glean. Gleaning might still be a way for helping the poor today, as organizations like Second Harvest can attest. There are intentional efforts to not waste the food that is left in the fields today. Too much food is wasted in the U.S., and just because it isn't perfect enough to be sold in a grocery store. That's a free comment in addition to the Bible study. So why glean? Well, that's explained a bit later in terms of the experience of being an alien. So just a little later in that same chapter in Leviticus 19:33-34 we have, when an alien resides with you in your land, you shall not oppress the alien. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you are aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. So here again you have the call for empathy with the foreigner, and the love for the foreigner, the alien, is called for here. We're familiar with the command to love our neighbor as ourselves. That's also in Leviticus 19. But here you have it extended to include those who are aliens in your midst. Love them as you love yourself. And they should be treated just like the citizen. Now let's look at a biblical example of practicing these laws and how they result in a blessing. We're going to talk about a Moabite gleaner named Ruth, probably the most famous gleaner in the Bible. In the opening chapter of the book of Ruth, a family from Bethlehem, Naomi, Elimelech, and their 2 sons have to travel to Moab in order to escape famine. So they're refugees in the broader definition of escaping danger of starvation. While they're foreigners in Moab, their sons marry Moabite wives, Ruth and Orpah, but tragedy strikes and all the men of the family die. We're not told why they die, but poverty could be a factor in that. In any case, they are devastated. The widows, Naomi, Ruth, and Orpah, have to decide what to do. Naomi decides that she's going to return to Bethlehem. She hears that there's food there now, and she wants to return alone. So her daughters-in-law have to decide what they're going to do. Orpah goes home at Naomi's urging. Ruth insists on going with Naomi to Judah and Bethlehem, to a place that she's never been before. There seems to be very little hope for these desperate widows. Now Naomi had a kinsman on her husband's side, a prominent rich man of the family of Elimelech, whose name was Boaz. And Ruth, the Moabite, said to Naomi, "Let me go to the field and glean among the ears of grain behind someone in whose sight I may find favor." She said to her, "Go, my daughter." So she went. She came and gleaned in the field behind the reapers. As it happened, she came to the part of the field belonging to Boaz, who was of the family of Elimelech. Just then Boaz came from Bethlehem. He said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." They answered, "The Lord bless you." Then Boaz said to his servant, who was in charge of the reapers, "To whom does this young woman belong?" The servant who was in charge of the reapers answered, "She is the Moabite who came back with Naomi from the country of Moab." She said, "Please let me glean and gather among the sheaves behind the reapers." So she came, and she has been on her feet from early this morning until now, without resting even for a moment. Then Boaz said to Ruth, "Now listen, my daughter, do not go to the glean in another field or leave this one, but keep close to my young women. Keep your eyes on the field that is being reaped and follow behind them. I have ordered the young men not to bother you. If you get thirsty, go to the vessels and drink from what the young men have drawn." Now, Boaz is obedient to the laws that support gleaning. In fact, we read elsewhere in the story that Boaz has gone beyond the legal requirement by allowing Ruth to glean what the harvesters have already gathered. So not only is there food left behind for gleaners, but Boaz especially favors Ruth by letting her pick out what his harvesters have already collected. And then Boaz tells Ruth to drink water that the young men have drawn. Now, if you're an attentive listener and you recognize how that story plays out in other parts of the scripture, you might catch an echo of stories where foreigners find their future spouses at a well. We've seen that with Moses and Zipporah already. It also occurs with Jacob and Laban's daughters. And these refugees go to a foreign country. They find a well, which is a place where you obviously get what you need, water, and they also find their spouses. Wedding bells are ringing. Now, if we're keeping that in mind, we might begin to suspect that Ruth will marry one of the young men. Remember, Boaz tells her to drink what the young men have drawn. So maybe she'll marry one of them, but actually, of course, the surprise of this story is that she gets the big fish. She's going to marry Boaz himself. So Ruth needs an explanation for Boaz's unusual kindness. And that's the direction that the story goes in verse 10. Then she fell prostrate with her face on the ground and said to him, "Why have I found favor in your sight, that you should take notice of me when I am a foreigner?" But Boaz answered her, "All that you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband has been fully told me, and how you left your father and mother and your native land and came to a people that you did not know before. May the Lord reward you for your deeds, and may you have a full reward from the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come for refuge." So Boaz's wish anticipates the blessings that will come to Ruth in the future, as well as to Boaz and Naomi, because Boaz has noticed Ruth for who she is. His noticing of her, I think, is also rooted in empathy. He has practiced the laws that teach empathy based in the experience of having been a foreigner. He is welcoming a foreigner. Now, there are other stories that point in a somewhat different direction, so I need to be clear about that as well. Moabites were explicitly mentioned, for example, in Ezra 9:1, as the sort of women that Judeans should not marry. Ezra the priest wanted to keep the Israelite people pure, and so, in fact, they were at one point divorcing foreign wives. The story of Ruth has a different perspective. I can imagine people telling Ruth's story as an answer to Ezra. So you don't think we should marry foreign wives? Well, remember, remember Ruth. And not only should we remember Boaz's love and care for Ruth, but remember the fact that after they marry, they become parents of the grandfather of King David, great-grandparents of the king. God used this act of welcome and hospitality and the love that grew from it to bless the whole nation. And so here is a story that answers a tendency to be more exclusive toward foreigners with a call to be open and welcoming. Now, let me refer to a contemporary story which also seeks to build empathy for refugees and foreigners. Gare Duaney starred in a movie titled The Good Lie. The Good Lie is about some boys, and actually girls as well, who left South Sudan as a result of the civil war there. They were part of a village that was largely slaughtered by marauding soldiers. Their parents and other adults in the village were killed, and so these children figured out how to walk across South Sudan to Ethiopia on foot. Gare Duaney not only starred in a movie about these folks, but he himself was one of the children who escaped South Sudan as a refugee. As he says, "I was among the kids that really walked Ethiopia by foot. It was a long walk. We never thought we were going to have something to offer the world. We were just looking for help." But Gare reached a refugee camp. He was eventually accepted as a refugee in the United States. He got a college education. He became an actor and was able to portray one of the other refugees who had a similar experience. The refugee he portrays is named Jeremiah, and Jeremiah and his siblings escape, having lost their parents. They are welcomed as refugees in the U.S., and Carrie Davis, played by Reese Witherspoon, welcomes three of these brothers to Kansas City. And they go through a huge case of culture shock as they get to know what life is like in America. And also, Reese Witherspoon, or Carrie Davis, goes through culture shock in a way as well, as she sees America through their eyes and gets to know her country as it appears to these immigrants. At one point, Jeremiah gets fired from his first job at a grocery store because he refuses to throw out the food that has passed its sell-by date. He simply cannot, in good conscience, waste that kind of food. To me, that's a reminder of the ethic that we discussed related to gleaning. How do you care for the poor? You don't waste food. You let them share in the food that would otherwise be wasted. So one way to do gleaning now is not only to go and harvest what's left over like Second Harvest does, but it could also be to find ways not to waste food out of grocery stores. Anyway, Jeremiah eventually becomes a Christian minister and exercising his sense of prophetic conscience. His brother Mamre decides to be a doctor, and Mamre is the one who tells the good lie. But I won't explain that because that would be a spoiler if you haven't seen the movie. I want you to see it as a way to build that kind of empathy. This is a movie that tries to teach empathy for refugees and for people who share in their work of their resettlement. Yes. That's a good question. I don't know what the basis for his name is. In this photo, he is traveling as a goodwill ambassador for the UN High Commissioner for Refugees. So this pictures him in Kenya as a ambassador welcoming or talking with refugees in that camp. So he's been involved in not only making a movie, but in other ways of working with and helping refugees. So, but I don't know the basis of his name. It could well be somehow related to the Hebrew word. Yeah. So now to our key verse. The alien who resides with you shall be to you as the citizen among you. You shall love the alien as yourself, for you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God, from Leviticus 19:34. And some questions for reflection and discussion. I encourage you, if you're looking at this in a class setting in a church, to think about these questions and discuss them. And for folks who are here at Bethany Theological Seminary, let me again invite you to share your comments about these questions or ask your own questions. So the law of Moses uses Israel's collective memory to teach empathy for foreigners, as we've seen. What are some good ways to teach empathy in the United States today? And how do our collective memories help or hinder that goal? Also, what hopes motivate you to befriend foreigners, or what stands in the way? So those are my questions for you to reflect on now, and I invite you to think about those and to share with one another or to share here in this room.